Welcome. Let's get started. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. Our meetings are public and you may join us here in person in the City and County building, or you can watch from our council agenda webpage, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, SLC TV. And we hope you'll continue to join in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. Right now we're convening our work session, which means there's no public comment, but please do join us tonight at our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share public comments. And of course, you can reach us by mail, phone, email, etc. Written comments that we receive on agenda-related topics are shared with all council members and posted to our website. And now we will begin our work session. The first agenda item is item number 1, informational updates from the administration. And I see Hannah Barton and Andrew Johnston on the agenda. Thank you for being with us today. Hi, Hannah. I don't know. Is there a light?
There's a light.
Sound like
okay. I couldn't hear myself.
You just got to be real close to it, though.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for having us. We'll go ahead and get started with the next slide. All too familiar feedback page. This is your last time seeing this slide for 2023, so be excited. Just a reminder for everyone to visit the IMS Civic Engagement Team's website for regularly updated ways to engage with the city and submit different feedback on different opportunities. Next slide, please. A quick update from transportation. The 600 and 700 North Reconstruction Project team is holding a stakeholder meeting today, the 12th, to present selected concept and preliminary designs for the 600 and 700 North corridor. The team was considering several options, one of which reduced vehicle travel lanes to help mitigate the street's hazards caused by fast-moving vehicles and provide space for continuous bike lanes. Reducing vehicle travel lanes has been an unpopular element among the different design options, given the function of 600, 700 North in the regional street network. So by optimizing available right-of-way, the project team has developed a design that maintains 2 vehicle lanes in each direction while carving out space for a separate bikeway. Additional details to come as the design is refined, but the basic design is being rolled out to stakeholders this month and then publicly in January 2024, And then a quick update from the Arts Council. On November 16th, the Arts Council and members of the Civic Engagement Team facilitated a West Side Public Art feedback session at the Glendale Library for the Mayor's Public Art Goal on the West Side. And the event had 19 attendees, and data is being compiled from that event for next steps. Next slide, please. Just another update from the Mayor's office. Our 2023 winter clothing drive is taking place this week. It kicked off yesterday and runs through this Friday, December 15th. The primary drop-off location for new and gently used clothing items will be located on the 2nd floor of the City and County building. Clothing will be accepted from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. This is an internal clothing drive, as well as members of the public are welcome to donate as well. And the following departments have agreed to host their own internal clothing drive at their separate city buildings: public lands, public safety, and the airport. And then lastly, our community outreach team is holding our final office hours of 2023. I will be at Redmond Heritage Farm Store on Highland Drive this coming Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. So members of the public are encouraged to stop by and ask questions and chat with me about the city. And that's all I have. Any questions? Thank you.
I don't see any.
Hi, council members. Andrew Johnston again, Director of Homelessness Policy and Outreach. The first slide is one you've seen multiple times, but I want to make sure it's for the public again and again because this is critical in the wintertime for winter overflow needs. You can see this is a flyer with all of the locations listed, ages, and times, best time to get a hold of everybody for winter shelter needs. Next slide. Still running at very high capacity at the base shelters. That means the year-round beds are running at 99% full, as well as the additional winter overflow beds. This does not include Code Blue beds. On Code Blue nights, like we had on Saturday night, there are plenty of beds available. We have up to 200 beds on those nights in addition to these, and there are options for folks, so make sure that's known outside of here. We have an encampment impact mitigation planned for this week on Victory Road up above the hill there. And then the temporary Shelter community is planning to open as soon as this week. Now, there's still things to be done there, so let's not put money down on the table on it, but they are working furiously over there to make sure it's open as soon as possible to get folks in there. And then the medically vulnerable population location had a ribbon cutting last week, and they are also working furiously in Sandy to open that as soon as this month. They're hoping to get folks in, maybe even before the end of the year, but definitely in January. So thank you, Councilmember Dugan, for joining us on that ribbon cutting. Next slide. I want to talk a little more about the temporary shelter community. Back in the summertime, we talked about the funding for this project. It was an idea, and we didn't have a location. We didn't have anything set, and we tried to get it open as soon as we could this fall. Today, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of a lot of people in the city worked a lot of hours to make this happen. I know that Orion Goff is somewhere behind me. He's back there in the back. A lot of these folks don't really want much attention, but we want to make sure that they get a lot of credit. We did start site preparations in September and did finish at our target date the beginning of November, so that the delivery of the units did happen as scheduled at that place. Obviously, there's a lot of folks, but I want to make sure they're heard publicly. So from Public Services Streets, we did a lot of grading of that location to level it out, and Mitch Hansen, David Anderson, Scott Jensen, Rob Lloyd, Jorge and his whole department, thanks Jorge, and JP Goetz, as well as some senior equipment operators in Chad Hollinger and Juan Gonzalez, and some other operators in Chris, Eduardo, Jared, Jason, excuse me, I'm going to mess some names up, Marco, Shelby, Trent, and Tylen. Engineering, Chris Donahue, Public Utilities, Christine Beidel, and also thank you to Laura Briefer and her team for allowing them to do some things pretty last minute for us. Public Transportation and Jenna Simpkins. We needed a site plan done from scratch there before we could do any work on that, and they did turn that around immediately. The RDA, Jim Serene, Allison, and then I guess we should give Danny some credit. Danny did a lot of work actually to work with us on this property. He was nervous, obviously, because as he'll say, the most permanent thing is a temporary program, right? But they've been so great to work with. The fire department and Chief Allred, Housing Stability, Michelle Hoon and her team, the police department, Captain Diamond, and his team as well, and then also the mayor's community liaison team. Now, the police department and the community liaison team and Michelle Hoon and her team, they did a lot of work up front for us, but they're also taking on a new project essentially in that area, and that'll go forward throughout the entire winter time. So they'll spend a lot of time down there, additionally to anything else we had planned on this winter. So I want to make sure the Weston and Hannah and the team, Tim got some notice because they went door to door. I knocked on all the doors and talked to everybody in that neighborhood to talk about this program. So I really want to make sure that you're aware of all the folks that put some time into this and made it happen. It wasn't me. It was them. So thank you very much to all of them.
Thank you for acknowledging them, Andrew. Madam
Thanks
Mayor.
for letting me interrupt for a second, because I want to thank also our comms team who put together all of those communications, both virtual and those that we've used with the community, and the city attorney's office who was involved also in making this possible. Thank you. But there's just one big name missing, and that's Andrew Johnston, who made this find a way to yes, and faster than we thought was even possible. So major thanks to you, Andrew. Great job. You have but one job, we always joke, and that's to solve homelessness for Salt Lake City. And he made a humongous step forward for everyone in this. This is the village that's building that village. So thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Chair or council members?
No, but just wanted to add my gratitude to all of the people listed, including yourself and the mayor and the whole team that made this happen. All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Hannah. We are going to move on to item number 2 on our agenda, which is an ordinance related to airport board code revisions. And Sam Owen from council staff is online to give us an introduction to this. Bill Wyatt, I think I saw Brady Fredrickson from the Department of Airports are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item in front of the council is a proposed update of the city code that governs the Airport Advisory Board. For example, one change is the word advisory being added to the airport board title in the city code. The existing ordinance describes a board that was structured under another form of city government decades ago. While the airport board operates mostly like the advisory boards of the other city departments, the code does not entirely reflect that. The proposal in front of you would bring the description of the airport advisory board up to date with both how it currently operates and how the boards advising other departments operate. Changes are also being made to comply with state law. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd ask to turn it over to the department.
Thank you, Sam. Brady, Bill?
Great, thank you very much. Good timing.
Yeah.
I think that this ordinance before you today is just an example, I'm sure, of many others. The original airport advisory board, rather the original airport board ordinance was probably written 50 years ago or so. The system of government, the form of government here in Salt Lake has changed. The ordinance, as you can see, has been amended over the decades and never really rationalized. And I think this is just an effort to really make it clear about the role of the advisory board and to kind of bring it into the 21st century. I will say that the advisory board has actually been acting as though this was their role, so I don't think there's any confusion. Councilmember Petro participates with the board and so might confirm that. But it seems like a good time to rationalize and to modernize the language around the Airport Advisory Board.
Thank you, Bill. Council members, any questions? This item? All right. What's the schedule for action on this? January 9th? And this is not an item that requires a public hearing, it looks like. Did I have that right, Sam? Oh.
That is my understanding, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted someone.
Nope, I think that's good. Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add to this item? Thank you for being here. Looking forward to updating the 50-year-old ordinance. Not that that's that old, but... Okay, item number 3 on our agenda is a follow-up to a discussion we had a little bit ago about the updates to the landscape buffers. Are we too far ahead of time, or is planning? Okay. We may be a little bit ahead of time. Let's take a 5-minute break to try and get the staff members related to this item here. we are running ahead of time, so it's not your fault, which is atypical and unusual, but thank you for making it down here.
Yeah.
So we're, again, back on item number 3 on our agenda, which is a follow-up discussion to the one we had a little bit ago about the changes to the landscape buffers text amendment. Jennifer, did you need to give an introduction, or we just jump into it? If we could go through like a real quick refresher, not like the whole thing, but just a little bit of a refresher of what you presented last time.
Okay.
And anything additional that you have that would help me.
Yes. There was a lot of information last time. This is a significant change to Title 21A of the zoning code. Last time we reviewed the goals identified by council last year during the landscaping briefing. We talked about the process that the planning division went through in including other divisions in the city to develop this chapter. We talked about simplification using lists, graphics, and tables. That was a very broad overview. Do you need me to get into any more detail?
Well, council members, you have...
I have a detailed question, but I'm not sure if you can talk about...
Do you have any more presentation to add, or you're just here to answer questions? Or you have more?
I do have a few more slides that I was planning on presenting on. I think it's like 6 more slides that I actually have talked about.
We never even let you finish. I remember this now. Okay, yes. Let's do that first.
I got into most, we had reviewed most of the landscaping chapter, but there were a few details based on public comments that I did want to address to clarify things, because it did come up during Planning Commission, and based on the comments that we've received, it will come up again.
Okay, so do we have the slides for this item that staff can pull up?
I'm sorry, I don't have the slides for this.
They're the same ones as from last week.
They are.
Just a moment then.
Thank you. I guess while we're waiting, I know that a couple of the questions that we flagged for discussion today is the question about artificial turf. I think I remember you bringing up a question about we had asked you to allow tree canopy to count towards the 30% coverage, but that could conceivably mean that you can just have one tree and no other plants in your whole yard. And I would like to discuss that. And then there's some other things, I think.
Yeah, I just had a question about the rocks in the park strip. I'm not sure because I didn't see that anywhere, but then I could have missed it. The size of the rocks and park strips, because that's always been a confusing item for a number of people.
Okay. Do you want to... Yeah, do we want to get into those questions?
Why don't we get into that while we're finding... Oh, they're here.
Okay.
We're just going to figure it out today. We're all over the place, but it's fine.
I think it will be slide 18, if I remember right. It's the public comment slide. Yep. And we can go to the next slide after that. Yeah, so like I was explaining, I wanted to touch on a little bit more about the many public comments that staff received during this rewrite process. And I think it's important to kind of clarify some of these comments because they do keep recurring. So many of the comments that we received focused on whether grass is proposed to be completely prohibited in required landscaping areas or landscape areas in general. These changes will not prohibit all grasses in yard areas. It's important to keep in mind that turf coverage maximums only apply to required landscaping locations. So that would be the front and corner yards, park strips, and buffer areas. In the rear yard, these standards don't apply. Turf limitations only also apply to certain grass species that require regular watering and are typically mowed and don't include native or adaptive grass species. Generally, this includes cool season grasses that are green during spring, summer, and fall months. the grasses that aren't included in the definition of turf are native or adaptive grass species. One example of many is buffalo grass that's considered adaptive to Salt Lake City's climate. And both of the images on this slide are buffalo grass. And next slide. We also received a number of comments and have seen flyers being distributed in neighborhoods related to the required park strip tree. At least one tree per property is proposed to be required in the landscaping chapter. However, this standard doesn't apply when the park strip is 3 feet or less in width. There's no new modifications to the required landscaping areas that would trigger this standard into effect. It's in an existing development where we can't require the landscaping standards are put into place retroactively, and when there's no increase of floor area in commercial or manufacturing districts. So for example, on the photo on this slide, we have turf in the park strip in the front yard. If this landscaping chapter was adopted by council, and there were no changes made, this would continue to be illegal landscaping, a landscape area. And so 5 years from now, if it looks the same, it would still be legal and not enforced on. And next slide. So the amendments to the landscaping chapter went to Planning Commission earlier this year. The Planning Commission recommended adoption of the chapter with one large modification to the proposed chapter. Next slide. The council last year asked us to address artificial turf in the chapter, and we did. Initially, we had proposed that artificial turf is prohibited in the park strip and limited to other landscaping areas as an impervious surface. In these spaces, we had included material limitations of turf grasses like blade lengths and infill materials. When the draft chapter went to Planning Commission, they forwarded a recommendation to council to prohibit artificial turf altogether in required landscaping locations. They had expressed some concerns about stormwater quality, and the Public Utility Director's statement regarding storm and groundwater is attached here, transmittal. And we also have Jesse Stewart with Public Utilities and Stephanie Dewar, who's available to answer any questions at the end of this presentation as well. There were also concerns about artificial turf being perceived as a landscaping expectation in the city. That being a very manicured, very green ground cover, and its perception of that landscaping expectation. Next slide, please. Now, there are a few other changes to be aware of that were made by staff after the Planning Commission hearing. And next slide. The last changes to note are the modifications that were made to the landscaping chapter after being heard at the Planning Commission in April. These modifications are further expanded in the transmittal that council received, but overall they included clarifications in certain sections of the landscaping chapter itself and reference sections in the zoning title that were a result of the recently adopted downtown building heights amendments. Next slide, please. Okay, so updating the landscaping and buffers chapter is really the first step in updating our processes and standards. The next steps, we can go to the next slide, please. The next steps would include updating supporting documents like Salt Lake City's plant list and hydrozone schedule, updating the Northwest Quadrant allowed plant list, updating Salt Lake City's landscaping best management practices for water resource efficiency and protection, and reviewing Salt Lake City's noxious weed guide. We'll also be working closely with public utilities, enforcement, and urban forestry in creating either a website or a handbook that summarizes and simplifies all of this information. And next slide. And that concludes my hopefully brief enough summary of the landscaping chapter.
Thanks, Nanette.
If there's any questions, we're happy to provide hopefully answers to you.
Do you mind if we go back to the slides about the parking lot requirements, and if you just give a brief reminder of those few things?
So a brief reminder of what we're proposing
What
in
the
the
new
landscaping
ordinance would
chapter.
require, yeah.
Okay. So the parking lot landscaping is proposed to be updated to improve tree canopy coverage, tree longevity, and health. So it's a proposed minimum 5% that needs to be dispersed throughout the parking lot for parking lots that have 10 or more stalls. In these spaces, to ensure that they are dispersed, it would require at least one landscaping island per 6 stalls. There would need to be a kind of a type of median in between double loading stalls. And there would need to be like terminal landscaping islands at the end of each parking lot row. In addition to the interior landscaping requirements, there's also perimeter parking lot landscaping requirements. That would be a 10-foot wide landscaping area with, I can't remember off the top of my head the number of trees, but it would be a certain number of trees per linear footage.
And that's for any project in any development that has a parking lot over 10 stalls, or does it apply to only certain zones?
It would be any parking lot in the city over 10 stalls.
It may, I guess my concern on that is that it may be really difficult, some of those things on smaller infill properties. So I'm wondering if 10 is the right number, or if it's like 25 stalls or 30 stalls when you're getting to be a much larger parking lot. I'm just thinking of like the redevelopment along 9th South, where we've got some houses that are turning into restaurants and there's some parking behind that. Those may have 10 stalls in them, but I just don't think that they'd be able to produce those or to meet those landscape requirements.
On properties like that, probably the biggest impact is actually the perimeter parking lot landscaping that would kick in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to shrink that down quite a bit and limit the amount of parking that they can actually provide unless they have a bigger lot. And because it's, I think you said 5%?
It is, yeah.
5% of the area of a parking lot. So if you figure each stall is 20 by 10, and then there's a drive aisle, there's roughly, I think, about 340 square feet per parking space. So that would mean a 10-stall parking area is 3,400 square feet. And so we're looking at about 170 square feet of landscaping as a requirement. That's a pretty small area.
But I think, yeah, I think that's the perimeter landscaping that I am worried about, because there's a lot of properties where one thing that's good about Salt Lake City's parking code as compared to other cities is that our ordinance allows flexibility for different, if you have a wider parking stall, you can have a narrower drive aisle. Mm-hmm. And that actually provides a lot of flexibility to redevelop infill properties. Whereas a lot of other cities just say it's 9 by 18 with 24-foot drive aisle, period. Every parking lot has to be that way. I like that ours has quite a bit of flexibility, and I'm worried that requiring 10-foot perimeter landscaping on smaller infill parcels is going to go the complete opposite direction and make a lot of parcels undevelopable. And then the other thing related to this that I want to consider is, it looked like the interior landscape islands need to be a minimum of 10 feet. And since we allow stalls to be as narrow as 8'3", I think we should allow the landscape islands to be as 8'3". So if I'm laying out a parking lot, I can just eliminate stalls and turn it into an island rather than have to eliminate a stall and get 1 foot 9 inches. It's just like adds just a bunch of extra work, and it'd be a lot easier to say, I'm going to eliminate 2 stalls every 10 stalls or whatever and meet my requirement. But if there's a reason why we absolutely need 10 feet for the tree to be alive, then someone that knows about trees, let me know that. But it seems like 8'3" would be enough.
It was recommended by the urban forester that 10 feet would be sufficient for tree health. That's something that we can talk to him about to see if making it equal width of a parking stall would still be sufficient.
Okay, I'd like that answer.
Yeah. Just along those same lines, looking, and this may be specific to the image, but are there any, I guess, recommendations or guidelines related to accessibility? I appreciate that from, an individual who may have like a handicap placard that they're going to have preferred parking. But I look at the proposed changes and I think about being a mom with a stroller. And so how much further I would have to get, to potentially navigate some of those parking islands. And I just didn't know if we had any recommendations or guidelines.
Yeah, I believe in the parking chapter, there's requirements for pedestrian ways within parking lot. We can verify that and let you know. And if not, we'll look into it for this.
And when is it that the landscaping strip between double loaded stalls is required? Any time that there's 2 stalls that touch each other, or is it at a certain point?
It's an option in order for them to meet the 5% landscaping.
Okay, so
it'd
you
be
could
like
still do landscaping islands, just like big islands at the end of the stall instead of.
Yes.
Okay. Council members. Yep, Councilman Petro.
If we're done with parking lots, is there a reason we're not eliminating those grasses outside of the ones that are allowed? Like, is it sentimental?
You mean outside of required landscaping locations, or
not Kentucky bluegrass?
Right. Like I just find it really difficult when we know the state of the Colorado River. We know that we are, as a state, one of the largest contributors, even though our city probably is leading the charge on fixing that. I just, watering food, I get, watering trees, heat island effect mitigating things, air cleaning things, I get. The grass really trips me up. And maybe I am not as attached to like the Leave It to Beaver white picket fence with the green lawn concept. But is there something else I'm missing about grass?
And this is something that Stephanie Dewar can speak on as well. One example, so the example that I had on the slide where I talked about different grass species, for example, buffalo grass. The photo on the slide actually was taken of one of my neighbors' front yards. That's buffalo grass. They never mow it during July and August. They water it once in order to keep it alive. It does have to be sprinkled, but even if it is, warm season grass, it doesn't necessarily require more water than a xeriscape type of landscape.
I think.
Did you have anything to add, Stephanie?
Is the question that there are grasses that do require a lot of water.
Yes.
And they're still being allowed, correct?
So
are those
a
prohibited?
Type of buffalo, so a warm season grass would still be allowed. A cool season grass, which is similar to like Kentucky bluegrass, would not, because it does require multiple waterings in a week.
Well, there are cool season grasses that require very little water. So we need to be careful. The distinction all cool season or warm season refers to is when they're actively growing. And so there are cool season grasses, which is what bluegrass is, like fescues and fine fescues, tall fescues, and even some bluegrasses that use less than 17 inches of water a season, which is comparable to, well, it's less than your vegetable garden. It's a really low water footprint. And so there are some grasses that are really adaptive to our region, and bring a lot of environmental benefit. So grass in itself, and even statistically we know from studies, Kentucky bluegrass can do really well on just 20 inches of water season. It is habitually overwatered, and that's more of a behavioral practice than a result of the lawn that's being chosen. So,
and these turfs serve a purpose, right?
Yeah.
They're helping to clean our stormwater. Is there a function that we should be preserving this for?
Is it okay if I go on for a moment then?
Go ahead.
Okay, so just like any other plants, grass brings environmental benefit. It adds nutrients to the soil. It supports soil health by supporting microbial and biological processes that are happening in the soil. It cools. Grass sequesters carbon. It helps reduce heat island effect. It actually provides pollination and habitat for certain insects, which also are pollinators or provide food up the food chain. So grass in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's the grass we choose and how we choose to maintain it. So part of this process, I would assume, is continuing educational programming to teach people how to water and maintain their grasses better. Any landscape can be overwatered, so really what we have here is a matter of intervention with behavior as opposed to a wrong plant. And so there are a lot of benefits. Now, there are other plants that also bring those same benefits, but some of the value of a natural lawn is, as a general rule, it's fairly easy to maintain. And brings all those same benefits versus, a rock or mulch landscape is also easy to maintain, but it may not bring the same benefits.
Thank you.
But very welcome.
Can I follow up on your question to make sure we get it right too? Were you referring to, say, Kentucky bluegrass in the prohibited areas or just everywhere? Because I think there's a difference between the backyards and the front yards.
I'm just wondering if we need to act more like an elevated desert in our behavior, and if there is a place for grass here, or if we needed to be a little more aggressive on that front. But I think especially if the other council members are satisfied, I think they're understanding that there's a function to it helps me a bit.
Could I answer one more part of that so that it might make you feel better? We did a program called Water Maps. Councilmember Dugan was a part of that. And what it did, it gives us an aerial view of landscapes in our service area, across our entire service area, not just Salt Lake City. And from that, we know roughly how much of the landscape as an average is lawn. And what we know is actually in our service area, it's less than 30%. So really, it's also not a big footprint. So lawn areas in our service area are getting smaller. People are making better choices. And we know also how much that lawn is being watered, so we actually can now really do directed sort of marketing towards it. But the lawn footprint isn't very big. It looks big because we're looking at, but if you look at the entire landscape, it's less than 30%, if that helps the issue at all.
And I think that said, it still, if it's watered appropriately or inappropriately, it still uses a fair bit of water. So I think that's what you're getting at with some of the low water grasses or native vegetation to go into some of these restricted areas.
Councilmember Dugan had it.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Wharton.
Specifically on the parking strips, because I've had a lot of neighbors and you see that they got rocks of different sizes in their parking strips. And I know we talked about this a long time ago, and I wasn't sure where we ended up on the requirements in the park strip as far as xeriscaping rocks, and if there's a size limit to those rocks, because I know that can have a stormwater runoff because of rocks could, in flooding season, then clog our sewers.
Yeah, and it was something that was talked about by council last year, and we did address it in the proposed chapter. So rock used as a mulch is limited to 50% of the area that's being mulched. If it's a required yard area like a park strip. So it's limited to 50%. And rock and gravel needs to have in a park strip 1 inch or greater diameter. If it's included in the Public Utilities Division's 4% grade map, the rock or gravel needs to be 3 inches or greater diameter. And the purpose of that is making sure that on some of these slopes, the rock remains where it's supposed to be in the park strip.
So on steeper streets of 3% grade or greater, it has to be 3 inches, or is that what you said? 3% grade?
Yeah, so 4% or greater grade, it needs to be 3 inches or greater diameter.
Okay.
And you said that it's limited to 50% of the yard area or 50% of the mulched area?
It would be the mulched area. So 50% of the mulched used in a required yard area can be rock, but that would be the maximum.
What if the entire mulch area is very low to begin with? I think the point of that is to limit how much rock mulch is in a given acre or something, right? Because
Yes.
rock mulch is worse for heat island and all those other things. But if I'm only choosing to mulch 10% of my yard, why couldn't I put that all as rock? And then the rest could be planted. Does that make sense? If I'm choosing to do a small area of mulch, rather than saying 50% of the area you choose to mulch can be rock mulch, just say no more than 20% of your entire yard can be rock mulch or something like that. So I could still choose to do no bark, but the rest could be planted with native grasses or wildflowers or bushes or things like that. That, to me, that seems like an easier way to gives more design flexibility, but also still meets the goal of not having the entire front yard be rock mulch.
So I think if you went to, say, 20% of a yard, that could result in the entire front yard being rock. If you, depending on, or
I think 20% of the landscaped area or
So
whatever. Maybe
right.
not of the lot, but like a certain percentage of your land, whatever number, it makes sense. 20% I pull out of my hat, but, and not necessarily of the lot area, but X% of the landscaped area is how much can be rock mulch, and the remainder must be either plant or bark mulch or whatever other kinds of things.
So just to make sure we're on the same page, when you say landscape area, you're talking about the areas required to have landscaping in them. Mm-hmm. So that is a box that is X square feet, and within that X square feet, 33% of that has to be vegetation. The rest of it can be anything else that's within the code, with the exception of rock, which is what you're trying to do is limit the percentage of that box that can be rock.
I guess to me that seems like the intent of that piece of the ordinance is that we say you just can't have entire front yards as rock mulch or entire expansive areas as rock mulch.
We can look at that wording and I think we get the intent.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a little bit more flexible way. Councilor Wharton?
Thanks. So I'm going to ask about turf, and just to be clear, like I don't have a position on turf. I don't have I'm not being paid by
You don't own an artificial turf company?
No, I do not. So it's not that I'm sad that Planning Commission recommended taking it out, but I do want to have the discussion. I surprisingly, or maybe it doesn't surprise anybody, but I have a lot of residents that are very interested in this conversation, and it's been hard for me to explain the whole turf issue because I'm not an expert. I tried to read through some of the attached documents. So for the purpose of just educating all of us, tell us why you initially wanted to include some artificial turf and then why you took it out, and is that the right decision? My understanding is that not all artificial turf is created equal, and there are some that is more environmentally friendly than others, but maybe it's that none of them are sufficiently environmentally friendly for our standards. I don't know. I want to have the discussion and in public, so I can see you're excited. You're ready for my question, so let's hear it.
So let me clarify one thing real quick before I turn it over to Stephanie, who's really is our expert on artificial turf.
Yeah.
But when you're talking turf, I think in the ordinance, turf is referred to as grass turf.
I mean artificial.
And you're talking artificial turf. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in your packet you've got a lot of the things where it's got issues with what goes on underneath the turf and how the soil doesn't benefit from the nutrients it could put into it. It's got its manufacturing issues. It's what it's made of. Potentially microplastics and PFAS can come off of that. So there's a lot of unknowns still about it. And then I think Stephanie mentioned heat island and a few other things, but I'll turn it over to Stephanie to expand on that.
Great, thank you. And don't assume, I know I look like an expert in all things, but don't assume that I'm an expert on this, so.
I appreciate the question and the opportunity. Is there a specific question? I mean, I've done a lot of research around this area for a long time before I was in this.
You might want to specify yourself.
Okay.
So we could talk about its impact on heat island effects, soil health. A short answer is there is a growing body of scientific evidence generated by universities and some government agencies that are looking at the negative impacts of artificial turf. Now, they started out to look at just what does artificial turf bring to the landscape and to our environment, and the outcomes have been negative.
Okay.
The studies that indicate more positive tend to be generated by manufacturers. Now, as a summary, one of the things we did is a couple of years ago, we worked with Utah State University, and we asked them to generate a white paper on the literature and the science around artificial turf. What we found was, it didn't get into your packet. I'm happy to send it to anyone. The short story is there aren't, the list of negatives is much longer than the list of any positive it might bring.
Okay.
The other part of it, though, that we don't know, and I think this is critical for us, given our concern about urban heat island effect and tree health, is there has not been a single study that shows long-term impact of artificial turf on soil health or on the water needs or long-term health of plants surrounding the artificial turf. So what I imagine is in a neighborhood, you've got your front yard, you take out your natural lawn, you put in artificial turf, you leave your trees and shrubs and flower beds. What happens to them over a period of time? And so we actually are funding right now, we're working with Utah State University. They're looking at doing a study that would help us identify that exact thing. I was just in a meeting today with an organization that's national, the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and their research committee is very interested, and there might be other communities joining us in this. Because this could be something that's not reversible is also a concern. So besides the microplastics, PFAS, the other health impacts in terms of respiratory issues, I mean, we are not even talking about that in this paper. On top of that, there are these potential long-term impacts we don't know the outcome for. And what we need is to study that. Because once it's down, and none of the artificial turf lasts as long as manufacturer claims, and it is not recyclable because of exposure to UV and AV rays, so it's going to end up in the landfill. And that it's just that simple. And not only the artificial turf, but be mindful that under that artificial turf are base layers. So there's a sand layer, and then another layer, a drainage layer, and then the cushion layer. And many of those are not recyclable also, and also have potential chemicals that are part of their manufacturing component. Even a common one is tires, rubber. Well, that comes with almost every rubber tire now has metal in it. So you're going to have metals that are going into the waterway or into the soil. So California is recently looking at passing a ban on artificial turf. There's a number of water agencies in California that have rebate programs. Not only are they not funding artificial turf, but they're not allowing artificial turf in programs that receive funding for landscape transformations because of the concerns. So this isn't just an us topic. This is a topic that's happening all over the West. And most water agencies are erring on the side of caution for health and long-term impact because of basically plastics in our landscape.
Okay, Councilmember Petro.
Oh, wait, sorry, I have one quick follow-up. My question was more narrowly, though, is originally when this went before Planning Commission, we were recommending a small amount of artificial turf, and then that was removed after. Can you tell me how that came to be, and I can sort of assume by what you just said about why you arrived on the answer that you did, but tell me about that part of the process.
Yeah, so initially we addressed it in the landscaping chapter and permitted it as an impervious surface because the water runoff would be approximately the same as any other impervious surface. And we did that mostly because the council asked us to address artificial turf and because of the number of people that we receive in the office that ask about artificial turf and have an interest in it. There were material limitations. So there were infill limitations because there's issues with the rubber pallets or the pellets.
Explain that to me. I don't know what that.
So just like Stephanie was saying, a lot of these rubber, like the infill in artificial turf, some of it is recycled tires.
Okay.
And you get heavy metals in that infill. It gets into the water system. Or the stormwater, and it becomes an issue. So initially, those types of materials were prohibited. As we got further into it, when it went to Planning Commission, there was a general consensus at Planning Commission that artificial turf should be prohibited based on the effects of groundwater and stormwater. And the letter from Laura Briefer talking about those effects.
And that's one thing I wanted to touch on. I think Stephanie talked a lot about some of the other implications, but just from a stormwater management, it does act as an impermeable or a less permeable surface than grasses or vegetation. So that's going to bring more water flashier into our system to manage the stormwater, and then it's also going to have that pollutant load that it might be carrying. So it's got a water quantity and a water quality issue going into our stormwater system.
Is it worse than hardscape?
Oh, really? Why?
Sorry. It depends on the type of hardscape. The issue with artificial turf versus hardscape is typically concrete and even wood decking lasts longer than most artificial turf layers. And say decking, for instance, has an air gap between the decking material and the soil, so it has the least amount of negative impact on soil. Concrete doesn't have a good impact on soil, but the distinction between concrete and artificial turf is their duration, their life cycle, if you will, and also the volume of water that goes into making them. If we look at this from a water conservation aspect, which I didn't even talk about, artificial turf takes a lot of water to manufacture, but also it needs to be cooled and cleaned and disinfected. So in an artificial turf area, for instance, that's being used in a playground, on a regular basis, it has to be disinfected because lawn, as another benefit, has natural properties because it's a living organism and it helps clean whatever lands on it so that by the time it works its way through the soil, the bacteria from feces, from birds, animals, cats, dogs, whatever, or sweat or spit are cleaned. Artificial turf doesn't have those processes. So literally it is disinfected with chemicals or with a wash product. So you don't have to disinfect concrete because it's not used the same way. You have to disinfect and clean and frequently cool artificial turf.
So a yard that is almost entirely concrete, except for the required parts, would be better than, in your perspective, better than entirely artificial turf.
I'm not sure we can answer that question.
Same amount of actual plants.
This is now an academic exploration.
Okay, Councilmember Petro.
Tangentially, do we have the same concerns about artificial mulches like rubber mulch, and are those restricted as well?
Those would be restricted. Okay. In this ordinance, rubber mulches are restricted. They're prohibited.
Okay, Councilmember Wharton, and then Young. Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Young. Whoever wants to go first.
So I really appreciate understanding some of the larger academic research that's going on in this area. I think to echo where Councilmember Wharton started is that we do have constituents, though, who may not necessarily have all of that information in terms of being able to inform them why the city is making the decisions that it is. And I think about it in terms of even just sports, you know, and that you see the athletic fields that are going in for professional teams, and that tends to be more of the public understanding of what is considered, you know, a high quality product versus some of the nuances we've discussed today. So I would just wonder that as we move forward with this, it might be helpful to have just kind of some high level bullet points around these are things the city considered and concerns that we had that led us to, you know, the recommendations that we have.
I think that's a great point. I think we can work with the other departments here and get that messaging out.
Councilor Wharton.
And I'm assuming that did sustainability have a chance to like weigh in on all this too?
They did. We sent them information on the updated chapter. We didn't meet with them one-on-one. We met with other divisions that weighed in on the proposal.
Okay. And then my last request would just be, and maybe this is already something you're planning, but you know, when we're creating, after we approve this and roll it out, my recollection is that USU has a pretty expansive like list of recommended plants and things. And is that something we can include in our materials? Say, you know, go here, get these plants, because I really think that will help a lot. I know that probably in the summer months, 2 to 3 times a month, I'm directing people to USU or to something like that to say, go get these plants. And it'd just be a lot easier if I could say it's all in one spot on the city website, everything you need, click on the link, and there'll be more plants than you ever wanted to know about. And you go buy those.
We have that on our website already. So if you go to the water conservation page, we actually have a page dedicated to SLC turf trade, which is a low water cool season grass that was developed in partnership with Utah State University and the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance. But we have plant lists, we have recommended turf varieties, we have great resources and information on this, and it's on our page. We can link to other city pages to make it easy for folks to find, and we keep that fairly well updated.
Great, that's so great. Thank you.
Okay, I do want to talk about tree canopies. Go ahead.
I was asked to just bring one thing up from enforcement, and that was related to the height of vegetation in park strips, and because it's one of their main things that they get called on. The code, even this code, limits that to 22 inches, and they wanted us to mention that as something that maybe the council would consider some alternative to that, provided things like any vegetation in the park strip isn't creating a hedge that somebody couldn't see through, it's not blocking clear views, and things like that.
So the request is to make additional changes to this ordinance?
They asked if it would be discussed, just because they, you know, I think there was a fairly well-known situation that made the news where someone had sunflowers in their park strip and you could still see through.
But the ordinance already prohibits that, right?
The ordinance currently does, and this proposal left that part alone, so it didn't change it. So,
wait, sorry, the current ordinance prohibits those hazardous.
It limits vegetation height except for trees to 22 inches.
Okay, which is
this proposal does the same.
Okay.
And what was, sorry, can you remind me of what that story was? Because I think I heard residents asking about that too, but I think it was totally different context. So what was that?
It was somebody had some sunflowers both in their front yard and their park strip, and there was a violation. Technically, it violated the code because in the park strip, those sunflowers obviously are over 22 inches in height, and they overhung the sidewalk, blocking portions of the sidewalk.
Okay.
And so that was the second piece of that high-profile one.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And
Mr. Chair,
we still are prohibiting that in the new ordinance.
This proposed update did not change that provision.
Okay.
Is there anything that we need to do to make auto pedestrian safety even stronger in the proposed ordinance, or is it staff's
So
opinion
that's one of the reasons why it's limited to 22 inches. But with recently changed Clearview requirements, and the fact that not all park strips are created equal, and some may be 30 feet wide and have 4-foot tall shrubs in there, or a weeping willow tree, which technically would be allowed because it's a tree, but it may have the same types of impacts. And so the idea is really the impact is making sure that sidewalks still maintain some visibility and they're left open, right? They're not blocked. And we think that there's probably ways that we can word that without limiting it to 22 inches in height.
I'm interested in updates to that section that would make it more clear and effective.
And that I have a disagreement in one of my neighborhoods about the same thing. The site between two houses, 30 inches or so. Is that same portion of this landscaping?
No, that sounds like it might be the Clearview.
Yeah.
So that isn't changing. And
that's not changing either.
No, we want to maintain that because that is directly related to safety on the sidewalks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. I do want to talk about tree canopies. So we asked for you to say that tree canopies count towards the 30%. I appreciate that you brought it up because I don't want to say like you're just going to put a tree in that's really tiny, but when mature, it's going to be cover 30%. That's like the only plant in your whole yard. To me, that's not something that we should allow. So I want to reconsider our request to allow that. And I don't know if that means you're required to have 30%, only 15% can be can be satisfied by a tree canopy, or tree canopies only count as 50% of the coverage that other ground cover would count. I'm not sure exactly how to get there. I'm not opposed to a yard that has a lot of trees saying that's their. I like trees. If there's a lot of trees, I think that's okay, but I don't want just like one little puny tree that won't actually cover 30% of the yard for another 10 years until it matures. So maybe it's just that it's at the time of planting, it still has to cover 30%. I don't know how to get around that, or maybe we just say the canopy doesn't count. But
one way that we could do that is that you could say that the tree canopy counts when it's like either like an existing mature tree, and then have a different requirement for when something new is planted. So, we can show plenty of examples where people have maybe like a 12 or 15 foot wide park strip or a small front yard where they have, a large tree that's been there for decades and it shades almost the entire area, and it, they just mulch the ground surface, and it actually, I think, achieves all of our intents. So I think we could look at something like that, where if it's an existing tree with a canopy over a certain size, that it counts towards the tree coverage or the vegetation coverage. Then if not, then they would have to come up with some sort of additional plantings.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want you get. I already said it. Okay. Any more questions on this, council members? I don't know if Councilmember Valdemoros or Pui still with us. Let's move on to item number 4.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting this done. I know it took longer than we thought, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Item number 4 is a follow-up discussion about budget amendment number 3. And Jennifer Bruno and Ben Ludke are here, along with Mary Beth.
The public hearing is scheduled for tonight. The standard practice is for the council to hold a public hearing and at the next regularly scheduled meeting, consider adoption of items. The motion sheet for tonight does include 4 items that are time sensitive. and I'll review those real quick. The first one is A15. This is the mill and overlay pilot program, where the council approved $750,000 in CIP to purchase the equipment and $130,000 in the annual budget for the supplies. But then after appropriation, the manufacturer increased the prices by $205,000. So this is the additional $205,000 from the county quarter-cent sales tax for transportation. It's a dedicated funding source for transportation that goes through CIP. It has a fund balance of its own. So the funds would come from there to make up the difference. And the prices are going up again, I think later this week or next week, which is why it's time sensitive. The next item is A16, $300,000 from general fund balance for the Road Homes Family Winter Hotel Vouchers interim plan. This would go through June of next year, which is when the non-congregate family shelter is hoped to open. The total cost of the plan could be over $1 million, so this would not be fully funding it, but the $300,000 is significant. There are other pending requests to other entities for the additional funding need. The next item we didn't get to last week. This is D2. It's in the housekeeping section. It's $4.2 million from the IMS fund balance. This is a reappropriation. So the council's previously approved this funding for multiple other items, and IMS was not able to encumber those by the end of the fiscal year. This is usually because the manufacturer wasn't accepting orders at the time. So the 4.2 million lapsed to fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. This is reappropriating the funds since those equipment, those software programs are still needed. And the last item is A4. This is the new FTEs and legislative division in the attorney's office. And what you'll see in the motion sheet is $203,000 for the 2 FTEs that the council straw pulled support for at the last briefing. It's the new legislative director, an appointed position, and the senior city attorney, which would be a merit position. A note, there's 2 other items related to the budget amendment that you'll also see on the formal meeting agenda tonight. They're both listed as tentative. One is a resolution, which is requesting that emergency medical personnel, including paramedics and social workers, be admitted to the Tier 2 firefighter retirement system. And that's related to the first item in the budget amendment, which is requesting the additional civilian paramedic FTEs. So since the council didn't straw poll that item, and we did receive a modified proposal today, if we don't have time to talk about that today, you could vote on this resolution later after you talk about the modified proposal, potentially next month. The other item on the formal meeting agenda is related to the legislative division, and it's amending city code. I believe there are hard copies at your seats with potential changes in red line to what the administration had proposed, and I think Councilmember Wharton was going to speak to that. And we do have them ready to screen share if you wanted us to pull them up.
Should we go into that now, or did you want to? Are there other time-sensitive ones you want to?
Those are all the time-sensitive items. There are other items we haven't gotten to, but we wanted to focus on those time-sensitive ones first.
Should we try and knock out the easier ones first of those time-sensitive ones? Like, we already agreed to the equipment, the mill and overlay, right? So
Yep.
I don't think we need to do
You straw polled that one. You also straw polled the family winter hotel vouchers.
And so we're good on that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
The 4.2 million, the reappropriation for IMS, you didn't talk about that or straw poll it last week.
Okay.
In that case, it was just wasn't used, and so and it was sent back to general fund, and they want their money back, or not want their money back. But
so the IMS fund has its own fund balance, so it's taking it from the IMS savings account and reappropriating it for the original use to go buy the equipment.
yeah, back to IMS to use, right?
Yep.
Is anyone? I don't see any objections to that. Do we need to straw poll that?
I'm seeing thumbs up, nods, so we'll have that. And
Okay.
just a note, I think we're going to keep seeing this. The amount of reappropriation, just like the fleet fund, because of narrower ordering windows for manufacturers, this has become an annual thing. So you might see it again this time next year.
Okay. And then was there one with the fire department positions?
So that one has a modified proposal, and it's not time sensitive in the
Talk about
sense
that
of the
later.
other
Okay.
items. Yeah,
So it's really the legislative division that we need to discuss.
correct.
Do you want to jump in, Councilmember Wharton?
So, at our last meeting, I had raised a question to the city attorney about requiring advice and consent for this division role because of the different nature, I guess, of the role. But in talking with the administration and talking with Katie and researching more about the separation of powers issues that associated with it, what I think from after talking with all of you and hearing what the concerns were, I think that this different approach of adding this language that you see in front of you in red is something that we're on like much firmer ground in terms of separations of powers. It's something that I think achieves the concerns that I heard raised and the concerns that some of the concerns that I shared, and that is that from the beginning when we started doing this one voice model that we've called it, which I think has largely been a big success and has really helped both branches and has given us as a council more access and more involvement and oversight and input, all of those good things into the annual legislative session and interim sessions. So I really believe in that model. I want to continue to build on the progress that we made over the last couple of years. But I know that there are some concerns about making sure, how do we know that we're, as a council, that we're going to get the same updates, or we're going to get to the timely information that we need to make to give the good and intelligent input. And I think that this, maybe even more effectively accomplishes that than the advice and consent. So that's sort of how it came to be. And I want to thank, in particular, our city attorney, Katie Lewis, who did a really awesome job helping me understand the situation and coming up with this alternative, which I think is a really good compromise. And I want to thank the administration for considering and letting me make my case. And I'm happy with this result, and I think it accomplishes again the concern that we've had for a long time, or not a long time, but plugs up a couple holes that have been there since the one voice model was created.
Yeah, and it codifies in ordinance what we've all been doing, and I think for me that's the bigger benefit of that is that for future councils and administrations, we have an ordinance now that talks about the thing that we've been doing that has worked, that we've just been doing, but now it is actual policy. So I appreciate Councilmember Wharton and Katie Lewis and the mayor's team and everybody for helping us get here. Councilmember Petro.
Thank you for kind of escorting us to a relatively elegant solution to both a politically and interpersonally complex issue. But I am concerned about, it does feel as though we've bound ourselves in a place where we can't create more. Maybe it's just that they can't ever be divisions if they're going to serve both branches equally. And therefore, I'm assuming if we create a new department, we always get advice and consent. So maybe the issue is just that this is a division And that's where we went afoul. If we had decided to make this a department, would it have been different? But I think this warrants a discussion, because as I see the trajectory of our city growing, I see the number and the variety of entities that have to serve both branches equally, likely growing with that. And I don't want to think that we would never get advice and consent as growing happens. We can't have exhausted that possibility. So I don't know if this is the right context where I'm happy to have it as a later discussion once everyone is not so fatigued from the weekend we've all just lived through. But it remains, I mean, these are the same discussions that the founding fathers had about how to successfully balance and check one another. So I'm not like hugely invested in feeling personally attacked, but I do want to make sure that as we grow and create more institutional resources for our constituencies, that we are balancing those tensions as proactively as possible and with a long-term view of what the city is going to have to accomplish.
Council members, any more?
I just want to thank Councilmember Wharton and Katie Lewis for smart minds getting together and coming up with a good solution. And I appreciate their efforts and their collaborative spirit, because it has shown it's worked over the last couple of years, the one voice, and I really appreciate the efforts we put forward together when we project our vision towards the state legislators. And we so dearly need to be a strong team when we conquer the hill. Conquer
the hill.
Strike that from the public record.
So, okay, it sounds like, Councilmember Valdemoros.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for doing this. I do feel like it's a really good step. Some of us have lived in an era when the two branches were not seeing eye to eye, and we did feel that we were at a disadvantage sometimes with the services of the attorney's office, or or sometimes in the legislative goals that we all had, because we weren't talking to each other very much. We were, not having a really good process that we should have had, and we didn't. And so I'm excited that this is moving forward, that we are all understanding that we're being informed, and we're being and we have access to those services equally, both branches. I'm happy that we're also putting a lot of weight to this new division because of the amount of work that will come our way in the next legislative sessions and the future ones. And also it's in a way somewhat giving us a process or a structure, so that if we disagree in the future, like we strongly disagree on things, then we have a way to, to all feel heard and all feel like we can move forward with the different advices that this division will give us, and not be in the dark. So thank you, Chris, and thank you for everybody that worked on this over the weekend. I heard it took a lot of energy, so I appreciate the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Valdemoros. So it sounds to me like we don't need to reconsider a straw poll, and that councilors, correct me if I'm misreading the conversation, but it sounds like we're comfortable with this direction for the legislative division director, or the legislative division ordinance. Is there anyone that wants to bring up the straw poll that failed last week for the additional two, or are we still at where we were last week? I know that was one that we weren't sure about. There were 4 requested, and we said yes to 2, and we said we still need to think about the other 2. In all the conversations that have happened, is there still no? Okay, sounds like that's a no. So we'll still have more conversations.
I'm still in
about
favor
that.
of it, but but I don't think that Honestly, I didn't really have time to get into that.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was part of the...
God, it's how many hours? It feels like used every single one. I guess just to reiterate, I think if we all know that this is a huge burden and it's a heavy lift on staff, and I want to put the top level people that we're considering in the best possible position and not hamstring them by not having the staff that they need. So for me, I would just prefer to go with all four, but that's my position. So I don't know.
I think we also discussed that we were looking at the sales tax revenue, how that was generated, and we were kind of waiting until if those numbers were looking good or not, and the general fund balance that was coming back to us after the end of the year, last fiscal year, those numbers to go move forward. And if we remember that, those were the outcome of those, we could quickly make this change.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that was going to come by the end of the year or early January.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can keep Budget Amendment 3 open.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. We can keep it open and we straw poll the first two.
Well, we already did, so you don't want to straw poll again?
I mean, I would, but we could also, but we did win last time. Was it 3-3?
Yeah.
It was 3-3 with the same 6 council members who are here, unless we still have Councilmember Pui.
Yeah.
Andro.
We could always straw poll it.
Okay.
Right.
If you want to go ahead.
I straw poll that we have the other two legislative FTs.
Okay.
The current straw poll.
Any questions to the straw poll?
Yes. Did you say four four positions? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you vote in the affirmative, you want all 4 positions.
Yeah,
Negative is to wait on the 2. Or do we just need to say the additional 2? Because
Just
if
the
I'm
additional
voting,
2.
Let's not reconsider.
Yeah,
the
just the
right,
additional
we're
2.
not reconsidering the
So
first.
Yeah.
I guess I have questions. Was on the fence, and I said last week that I could be persuaded. What is tell me why, those council members that are supportive of it, tell me why I should be supportive of this now.
So, from my perspective, when it comes to staffing, when you're going to have senior staff, those individuals are being hired for their expertise. And so you look at it through the lens of how do you want those individuals to use their time? Do you want them to use their time, explicitly towards legislative engagement, interactions, being able to kind of address those pieces? If that is the case, then usually they require those additional support staff positions so that they're not necessarily spending their time in more of those administrative tasks that just have to happen. And so I think for me, in being supportive of this, I was looking at it through the lens of if we're hiring additional senior staff and we're not hiring these additional staff below, not only are we either saying that those senior staff, we may not get that expertise directed at the high level need for 100% of their time, but in addition to that, I worry about the pressures it places on the existing administrative support staff to be able to then kind of assume some of those individuals into their responsibilities and what type of capacity we have for that. So those are my reasons for supporting the full request as it stands.
Katie, can I ask you for your input on that and what those 2 additional people would be doing that we don't want the senior people to have to be bogged down by?
Thank you so much for considering this tonight. The 2 positions that we're asking for are an administrative assistant and a special projects assistant. And I think that Councilmember Young did a great job of capturing the pressure that our existing staff will likely have with this additional workload of bringing in the legislative affairs director and the senior city attorney. I'll tell you right now, the recorder's staff has offered one of their special project assistants to help with all of the legislative tracking and work that will be necessary to support this division. The recorder's office already has an enormous workload. So it really does help a lot to have that additional administrative support, both as a special project assistant and as the administrative assistant. I understand that resources are limited and this is a mid-year budget request, so we are grateful for any support that the council has already and could provide, but it is a big undertaking for our team.
Another concern that,
Just a follow-up question. When you
okay, go ahead. Oh, let me.
Yeah.
So, are they positions you're confident that can be filled and trained before the session starts? That was another concern that I think we had.
Thanks for that question. I think at least for the special projects assistant, what we would do is ask the individual who is doing the work in the recorder's office to do the work for the legislative team while we hire a new person. So essentially that person would be doing the work of two people. We would ask them to do the work of one and then fill the other role as quickly as we could. So I don't know about the administrative assistant position. I don't know if there are internal candidates for that. There very well may be. That would be our goal, is to get those filled quickly and then backfill.
Councilor Wharton.
Yeah, I think what Councilmember Young said makes a lot of sense to me. And when I think back about times when we've had like bumps in the road with the One Voice, it's because we are asking too many people to do too many things, or too few people to do too many things. So I think we probably all, though, would agree that that is absolutely true during the session. Katie, what would support staff do, outside of session, outside of interim days, that that would there still be enough to justify that through the rest of the year?
Thanks for that question. I wish I had a legislative affairs director who I could ask to also provide information, but I'm going to do the best I can as the department director in this case. What I envision is that when the legislative session is not going, there's still a lot of tracking, prep, scheduling, training, making sure that the city is complying with the however many hundreds of bills have been passed during the session or the interim session, coordinating various meeting requests. So I think we will find that there is sufficient workload during the year to continue to be proactive on our legislative priorities rather than being reactive and kind of all jumping and running as fast as we can.
Okay, any more questions to this straw poll? All right, let's indicate your position on the straw poll.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I'm not doing full-time employees on budget amendments as a rule. Got it?
Okay, you convinced two of us. That passes 5-1 with Councilmember Baldemoros in the opposition, Councilmember Pui absent.
May I just speak briefly and express my and my team's deep gratitude for the trust that you're placing in us. The reason that we asked for these positions to be in the city attorney's office is to ensure that both branches have equal access, and we know that that is first and foremost based on trust. And so the conversation and the way we get to trusting each other is not always smooth, but I just want to be sure to express my gratitude for the support that you put in our office and our team.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for the support that you give to our team. We're all the same team. All right. Anything else on? Oh, go ahead.
One more, probably more logistical item related to this topic on the ordinances. I just wanted to make sure that on the second half of that sheet that's in front of you, there's a summary of the different other changes that are proposed in that section of the code. And so this is based on some recommendations. Section A adds a couple of clarifications that the attorney reports to the mayor and council, and clarifies that the city attorney supervises the recorder and director of legislative affairs. So given the recent straw poll, I would think that the council would be supportive of moving forward with those changes. Section B relates to the retaining of outside counsel, and I think based on earlier conversations, we need just a little more time to figure that out. There's not a pressing issue or time-sensitive matter about that, so I think the recommendation would be to hold off on acting on that section of proposed changes. Jump in, Katie, if I'm misstating anything. In the section C of that section of code, they're not proposing any changes to the city recorder. And then section D, just to confirm, we would include on the motion sheet those proposed additions in red to the Division of Legislative Affairs section. So assuming that that's okay, you'll see that reflected on the motion sheet. You'll have one motion sheet relating to the 4 FTEs that are going to be, or that are proposed to be added in the budget related to those FTEs. That will be in the budget amendment action. And then, as Ben said, later in the formal meeting agenda, you'll have the ordinance that I just went over to codify the changes to the structure of city code, to the administrative structure. Okay.
Okay. Any questions to that? Thank you, everybody, for your work on this. Are we okay to wait on the rest of budget amendment number 3 items till January? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to board appointments, and there are 4 board appointments. Brian Scott to the Planning Commission, Lana Taylor to the Arts Council Board, Sabrina Martinez to the Arts Council Board, and Luz Escamilla to the Airport Board. Before we start these, the first one being the Planning Commission, I need to disclose and recuse myself. Brian Scott and I work at the same architecture firm, so I will be leaving the room while we interview this first one, and I will come back after that's done.
All right. So, Brian, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you interested in the Planning Commission.
Sure. So as you said, I'm an architect, and I think my interest in Planning Commission really came out of some projects that we were looking for rezones for in the ballpark district and then along State Street. And so through that process, I kind of dug into some of the plans that have come out of the planning department for those areas, and then gone back through previous city plans, and really gained an appreciation for that kind of vision and moving that forward. And so I was really interested in that. The other thing is just that I come from a family where everyone else is a lawyer, so I'm very good at digging into the zoning and code and kind of picking it apart, putting it back together, and understanding it. So I think in part that's why when we did those, I enjoyed that a lot. And I just like to kind of help shape the city a little bit. So
Thanks. I love whenever we get an architect, because you're getting high attention to detail and like they enjoy that. Like, thank you so much. Anyone want to say anything? All right, so you'll be on our consent agenda. You don't have to be present, but thank you for being willing to give your time and talent to our city.
Thank you.
All right, can we call in Councilmember Mono, please? Can you?
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Petro. The next board appointee is Lana Taylor, who is being recommended for the Arts Council Board, and I believe you are here in person.
I'm here. I'm Lana Taylor.
Can you, is this microphone on?
Can you hear me?
Yes, just get real close to it.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I applied for this position because I've always been very interested in the arts, a great appreciator of the arts, As a youngster, I took art classes, music classes, dance classes. I was in plays and musicals, and I realized I have absolutely no talent whatsoever. And consequently, I decided to be a supporter of the arts. And to that end, I've volunteered for arts organizations, the Utah Arts Festival, Living Traditions Festival. I currently am an usher with Salt Lake County Fine Arts, also up at Pioneer Theater, so both performing arts. And I found, and certainly in my life, the arts really enrich my experience. And I think the arts are really accessible to everyone, whether those be visual arts in the traditional setting in a museum or in a gallery, or whether they be art in a public forum, or whether they be performing arts that you can see in the park, you can go to the theater. And I think really those opportunities, not everyone's aware of, maybe not everyone takes advantage of, but I applied for this because I wanted the opportunity to maybe serve my community in a different way and maybe help to promote those in a way that I haven't thus far.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Young.
So Lana, I too have no artistic talent, so we can share in that together. But something you said really resonated with me because I heard it from both our mayor and our leaders of the arts here for the city today, and that the arts truly boils down to something of community. And I'm incredibly grateful that you bring that lens of community and the willingness to serve and volunteer. So thank you for that. And I'm excited to have your voice helping to inform how our city moves forward.
Thank you. An impressive list of volunteer things that you do in the arts. So thank you for adding Salt Lake City Arts Council to that long list. You'll be confirmed on tonight's consent agenda. You don't need to be present, but that's when it'll become official. Thank you. Next is another Arts Council Board appointee, Sabrina Martinez, who is joining us online. Hi, Sabrina. Were you able to hear the instructions? Just introduce yourself, let us know why you're interested in the Arts Council Board, what your personal and professional experience that's relevant to this may be, and anything else you want to share.
Yes, perfect. Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Good evening. So my name is Sabrina Martinez, and I am a licensed clinical social worker up at the VA hospital. And I am also a mother, wife, friend, all of those good things. And I've also been a huge passionate, art-loving member of Salt Lake City for as long as I can remember. Like Lana, I too have been going to the Arts Festival, and I've been to festivals and community arts things across the country, and I'm always just so impressed how Salt Lake City fosters arts. And as a social worker, I applied for this position because I really am interested about making sure and advocating that our arts are really inclusive to everybody and that we look at how we can really continue to reach everyone in our communities. I love being on work groups and looking at how to change things and either make them more progressive, more inclusive, more fun. And so definitely just honored to be here and to be a volunteer of Salt Lake.
Thank you, Sabrina. Council members? Councilmember Petro?
As someone who comes from the arts world, thank you all for taking such an interest in it. Like, the arts are more than just a pretty decoration that you nurture when things are good and take away when things are rough. They are literally the core of who we are, the essence of us. And so thank you for making sure that our core humanity is nurtured, and also, you know, that economic development thing. We're pretty good at that too. So thank you guys.
All right, yeah, I appreciate that. I'll appreciate, Sabrina, your willingness to serve Salt Lake City. You'll be on tonight's consent agenda, but you do not need to be present at the meeting. All right, the final board appointee is Luz Escamilla, who is recommended for appointment to the airport board. Senator Escamilla, are you here with us? Okay, we will put you on an agenda, a future agenda, and reschedule that. So that brings us to the end of our items. There's is there a report of the vice chair, Madam Vice Chair? Okay, no report of the chair and vice chair, but I do think there are some executive director reports and announcements, and then we do have a closed session.
The only announcement I'm seeing, but I wonder if I have outdated information, is the calendar. So adjustments and questions about the annual calendar, if the council could look at that and get back to staff with any questions or feedback. And then maybe what we'll do is if there are additional announcements, we can cover those at the end of the formal meeting.
Okay.
I don't know if I have the outdated date.
I think that's the only one that it says
Okay.
here. So.
Okay, great.
All right,
Let
and
staff know if
then
you see any
we
problems with that.
are looking to enter into closed session for purposes of attorney-client advice and deployment of security personnel and devices,
And can you also add pending and reasonably imminent
as
litigation?
well as pending
please?
and reasonably imminent litigation. So 3 purposes for our closed session tonight. I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
We have to actually make the motion. I move that we go into closed session for purposes of discussing attorney-client privilege matters, reasonably imminent litigation, and deployment of security personnel and devices.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Wharton and a second from Councilmember Petro. Is there any discussion to this motion? Okay, seeing none, I will roll call. Councilmember Young.
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
Petro.
Yes.
Wharton.
Yes.
Valdemoros.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes 6-0 with Councilmember Pui.
I'm a yes too.
Oh, Councilmember Pui's with us, so that passes 7-0. And we will be entering closed session.
And I just wanted to confirm for Councilmember Valdemoros and Councilmember Pui that there will be a separate link to join for the closed session. Cindy Lou, I'm looking at you really quick. Is that right? That's right. Okay. So look for a separate link. Let me know if you have any trouble finding it.
And when we exit closed session, this will be the conclusion of our work session, and we will be going to formal session at 7. All right. Thank you, Salt Lake City. We'll see you at 7.